This is a special episode. We're taking a moment to reflect on the first 7 wonderful episodes of The Graduate Edge, because over the past few months, I've had the privilege of speaking with 7 extraordinary professionals across different industries and different continents. From a CEO who started as an intern, to someone who worked with Nelson Mandela, to an engineer who crawled through naval ships in the Falklands just 6 weeks into her graduate program, to someone who spent 20 years in the European automotive industry before joining a 100-person startup. Their paths couldn't have been more different, and neither could their early career stories. Yet amazingly, themes emerged from every conversation. And in this episode, I'm going to bring some of those to life. Having analysed and reviewed the transcripts from these episodes, what's great is that these themes of stories and advice aren't the polished platitudes you might find in a lot of career advice. These are real people with real early career stories giving real advice. People who've lived through career setbacks, the unexpected pivots, the feedback, and the reality of becoming a professional, the ups and the downs. If you don't follow us on Spotify or Apple yet, please do. In our next run of episodes, we have someone who found herself managing exploration projects for a mining company at just 25 and now helps that company reduce its carbon emissions, to a former US congressman with whom I explore the parallels between navigating the hallways, decisions and votes on Capitol Hill and building a successful career. Welcome to Graduate Edge. Seven themes from 7 episodes. Let's go. Number 1, relationships are your career foundation. They are not transactions. You might recall in Katie Riggs-Smith's episode, she told us a story of being offered the CEO role at Mindshare. She turned it down 3 times in the one conversation. She did not feel ready. Katie did not think she was the right person. The thing was, everyone around her, her main stakeholders, had already decided. The chairperson, the regional CEOs, her colleagues, they'd all agreed that Katie was the one. Why? Not because she'd been chasing the role, but because of the relationships that she had built over more than a decade to that point in time through consistent quality work and genuine connection with the people around her. As Josh Tyler told us in the very first episode, he was made redundant at 26 with a brand new mortgage and a 3-month-old baby at home. 26. He told me networking isn't about working the room at drinks events. It's about building trust through the work you do and connecting with people on a personal level in your workplace. So when Josh found himself suddenly jobless with a new mortgage and a newborn, it was actually those trusted relationships, the people he had built those relationships with, who provided his next opportunity. In fact, someone in his network told him about a new role over coffee before Josh had even finished explaining his situation. But perhaps the most powerful perspective on relationships came from Jean Olwang in the 7th episode, who spent 20 years building Virgin Unite, working alongside Richard Branson and global leaders like Nelson Mandela and Archbishop Tutu. She said, deep connections are your trampoline. They'll either help you fly or catch you when you fall. I think they do both. Jean built 22 collectives of leaders from business and politics and the social spheres over 2 decades. But what has struck her the most was a revelation about some of the people she considered to be heroes. She told us, she, like many of us, put people like Mandela on a pedestal. But she said she learned that they became who they were because of each other, because of their relationships. She described, you might recall, the final lunch with the elders, one of those collectives, and a final lunch they had with Mandela in 2013, I think it was, only a few months before he passed away. There was laughter and tears and love in the room. The deep friendship felt so thick with that group of people. And at the end, Mandela, she said, stood up, gently slid his hand into his wife Gracia's hand, and before leaving, turned back and looked at this extraordinary group. Jean said his eyes lit up with the entire room as if to say, you've got this now. The lesson? What's the lesson for us? What's the lesson for those early on in our careers? We're never going to be able to have an impact as an individual solely. It's something Jean also emphasized. And if you don't surround yourself with those people who will help you create the impact that you want, the success that you want, the work that you love to do, you'll always be minimized to what you can achieve alone. So the lesson is, stop collecting business cards. Start building genuine relationships. do good work, be helpful, show up as a real human being. That's how you build relationships. That's how you network, if you like. These relationships will carry you through your career in ways that you can't even imagine right now. Theme number 2, master the boring stuff. And in fact, that can be your secret weapon. Terence Koo in one of the earlier episodes told us he spent 5 to 6 years doing internal audit work. By his own admission, it was not glamorous. He said I can't remember the quote, something along the lines of there's not a lot of interesting work in the audit space. Well, it's for him. Some people love it, and that's great. But here's what happened for Terence. That boring work that was boring to him anyway, taught him how to write concisely, which later made him exceptional at crafting strategy decks for the boardroom and for senior leadership teams in future roles. It also forced him to build rapport across every function of a business, because in internal audit, you have to speak to every function of a business. And he talked about having to learn very quickly how to build relationships and rapport, because quite frankly, no one wants to speak to the auditor. So to do the work well, you need good information. And to get the information, you've got to go and speak to a lot of different people, but no one wants to speak to you. Those relationship building skills he learned became invaluable in senior leadership roles and all sorts of roles later on. But he also reflected that he could not have connected those dots looking forward. You can only really connect them now looking back, and sometimes it's hard to see at the time. Pete McDonald had a similar story, but on a much longer timeline. After working at Rio Tinto in procurement, spending his weeks and months analysing just 8 customers, actually. He said it wasn't particularly dynamic, as he put it, found it a bit boring. He then went on and spent 20 years in the automotive industry in Europe. Some of that time was brilliant. Some, like his stint in China, which we might end up touching on later on in this discussion. He survived it, but hated it. The year after he went back to the UK, people were sort of asking, where have you been? What have you been doing? What did you learn in China? It's a different market. His experience wasn't immediately valued, and some of it was boring. But here's a twist. He said if you asked him the year after he got back from China, he'd say it was a terrible thing to have done. But if we ask him now, 15 years on, absolutely brilliant. He said he's so glad he went. He learned a lot. And he now actually does a lot of business in China. That experience and network is now quite valuable. So reflecting back on the lesson for the rest of us and for those early on in careers, if you're going to spend time doing something, become excellent at it. Even if it's not your dream job, even if it's boring, it's not about the work. It's about the relationships you're building. It's about the skills you're developing. It's about the reputation you earn from doing unglamorous work well. All of that will transfer to future roles in ways that you can't predict and you don't need to predict yet. You need to trust the process. Sometimes it can take 5 years, 10 years, or in Pete's case, 15 years to pay off. That's normal. Doesn't mean it's invaluable. It's worth doing. Theme number 3 is around being respectfully bold when you're young. Touching back on Terence's experience early in his career at PwC in London, he told us that story you might remember about writing a paper on fraud. His immediate manager wasn't particularly interested or impressed. So Terence had put all of this work in, and his manager kind of glossed over it, put it aside. But not long after that, Terence overheard another partner in the firm talking about opportunities in the fraud space. So what did Terence do? You got to remember, Terence is only a year or 2 in as a grad at one of the biggest accounting firms, professional services firms on the planet. What did Terence do? He sent his paper directly to that partner. That's a pretty big move early in your 20s or only a year or 2 into the firm. And it turns out that partner was the number 2 partner of PwC in the UK. It led to Terence working on their team, actually, and eventually getting him as a personal reference, something even other partners couldn't do. Terence told us if he did that as a manager, as someone established in their career, people would say, get back in your box. Terence's point was that a young person, as a grad a year or 2 in, the response quite often is, oh, isn't that nice? He's showing some initiatives. He's got some confidence. He writes reasonably well. It's worth doing, but you've got to do it respectfully. Sometimes those bold moves are great, but you've got to do it respectfully. Jean Olwang took a bigger risk. While working at Virgin Mobile and doing quite well, she found herself in a taxi with Richard Branson and overhearing Richard say that he wanted to do to someone else, different conversation. She wasn't in it. She just overheard it, telling someone that he wanted the Virgin Group to do something in the not-for-profit space. And so she put together a plan to do that. She said, it was scary. She said, I was thinking I was going to put this plan together and I could lose my job if they realized that this is actually something else she wants to do. But it was something that was just pulling her. And she did that. ended up co-founding Virgin Unite with Richard Branson and has been doing wonderful work ever since. And her advice to young people is there's going to be those moments in your life where you're going to have these opportunities, these fleeting windows. And if you don't walk through them, be it writing that paper and sending it to the partner like Terence did, or overhearing that conversation and putting that plan together to start a different part of the business, if you don't walk through those windows and give them a go, you might not be there next year, next month, let alone 3 to 5 years later when you think you're ready. So the lesson here is be respectfully bold and do it while you can. Say yes to opportunities, because you don't often know where they'll lead. Be proactive. Ask for meetings. Put your work in front of people. Request different opportunities. When you're early in your career, you have this free card, but it expires, usually within your first 2 to 5 years. The risk of doing those things is often lower than you think. And as Pete says, you can usually go back or rewind it if it doesn't work out. But as Gene warns, the window only stays open for a short amount of time. Number 4, your career won't go to plan, and that's fine. Olivia Kinghorn, in the episode called Defense of the Dream, you might recall, wanted to join the Royal Navy. When that didn't work out, she pivoted to the Ministry of Defence. 6 weeks later, she was on a plane to the Falkland Islands by herself as a brand new grad. That wasn't what she expected to do. And she went on to have a series of quite incredible experiences at the Ministry of Defence and now at Babcock as an engineer, as a woman in engineering and a woman in defence. It's worth re-listening to that episode or listening to it if you haven't. All of the episodes, actually. You might also remember Josh Tyler, as I mentioned, was made redundant at 26 with a 3-month-old baby and a new house. Life slapped me around the face, he said. He ended up taking a role 1 level down from where he'd been. That step down led to better opportunities. Careers don't always go to plan. Jean's parents wanted her to go to a company and work there for 30 or 40 years and work up the ladder. Instead, she volunteered to go and work with homeless teenagers on the streets of Chicago, I'm sure it was. Rejoined the telecom business she was in to go and launch that business in different continents, and eventually founded Virgin Unite, as we've said, working with global leaders and business leaders around the world on some of humanity's biggest challenges. Her career didn't go to plan. She talks about disruptive detours and being open to those and even creating them where you can. She said, I would urge people to have the courage to take the leap, to take on something new, to take what might seem crazy to other people who are thinking in a straight line direction, because that disruptive detour, the crooked line, actually helped me build a more broad-based foundation. Those are Jean's words, not mine. Katie Riggs-Smith calls her career actually untraditionally traditional. Staying 26 years at one company, which is a tradition of grandparents' time, but is rare today. But in that time, the plan wasn't clear. Moving from different roles, having different experiences, gaining different skills. It certainly wasn't a straight line while she was there. So the lesson is throw away the idea of a perfect career plan. Certainly throw away the 5-year plan. If it happens, redundancy is not personal. The need to pivot is not a failure. The opportunity to pivot is smart. Bad experiences can be lessons in persistence. Focus on building skills and relationships rather than following a rigid path. As Gene says, it's okay to fail, okay to pivot, and okay to take the crooked line. Number 5, know when to say yes and also when to set boundaries. Katie also talked about saying yes to everything in her career. She worked all hours, took on extra responsibilities, pushed herself relentlessly. But 8 years in, she was burnt out. Katie was working until the early hours each day, getting a couple of hours sleep, going back to the office. Her words were she was a shell of a person. Things got pretty bad. She called her friend and she told us the story to tell her friend that she was resigning. And her friend asked her a simple question. Is it you or is it the company? That question changed everything for Katie. Katie realized it was actually her. If she just went on to a different company, she'd probably do the same thing there. Her inability, not the company's, her inability to set boundaries, her habit of saying yes to absolutely everything at all cost, her assumption that people would notice that she was drowning and do something about it for her, were wrong. The next day, instead of resigning, she went to her managing director and said, look, I'm at breaking point. Here are the things that need to change. The response? Yes, done. Let's do it. We don't want to lose you. We want to help you. Thank you for telling us. There's such a powerful lesson in that. If you're doing good work and you're working really hard, that's fine. The company and the manager wants you to be able to keep doing good work. If that's at risk, speak up, say something. Your manager wants you to be able to keep doing the work. So if that's, if that looks like it's not going to continue, they're going to want to change things for you. Jean talked about this idea that the longer you stay in something where you're unhappy or stay working the same way in an unhappy way, the harder it gets to get out. When you're not satisfied, you're also losing self-confidence. So don't stay working like that for long, and don't stay in the wrong role for too long either. The lesson is to say yes to opportunities and work hard, but watch out for signs of unsustainable patterns. Speak up if you think you're drowning. Ask yourself Katie's friend question. Is it me or the company? Is it me or the situation? Own what you can control. Address what needs to change. This is your life. This is your career. You're the one that wakes up with you each morning. Don't stay where you are or how you are if you're unhappy. As Jean warns, you'll lose confidence the longer you wait. And it doesn't help anyone, especially not you. Number 6, be yourself at work. You cannot sustain a mask for 40 years. I couldn't do it for 40 years. I remember Josh Tyler telling me that in our recording. And he said he had to work out a way of being true to his own sense of his personality and values. Find ways of bringing that to work. He described his first couple of years in the workforce feeling like he needed to leave his personality at the door and become a work version of himself. I think we all feel that to an extent. I think it's natural that the more you get into your career, the more confident you feel with yourself. But you need to have that at the forefront of your mind. You need to be conscious of that, because if you are, I think you're going to reach that point of comfort sooner. The breakthrough came for Josh, I think, when he realized people connect with authenticity, not perfection. That was his thing. The networks are not built through transactions. They're built when people see beyond the work mask. People get to know the person. People like working with people they like. People like doing business with people they like. And the best way to find people you like or have people like you is to be yourself as much as possible. And Dorena Garland brought a different perspective on this. Her parents were teachers, not from corporate backgrounds. And so she said, I can't remember the exact part of the story, but she said she didn't know about things like different elevators for different executive teams, which some companies still have. And that you're not necessarily meant to approach different people at certain times. She says, that's obviously not how I am as a leader. And it's not how she is as a leader, but it's mind-blowing stuff in terms of hierarchy. And not being intimidated by titles for her became her superpower, but she had to work on it. And coming from a family of teachers and people who were not in the sort of corporate business world, actually helped her. And I think that can be a superpower for a lot of people in similar positions. Olivia Kinghorn, though, I think had maybe the most powerful message about being yourself. As a woman in engineering and a woman in defense, two environments where female representation is probably still a bit too low, or even vastly too low. She told us that if you're different to the people around you at work, it is really important that you be in that room, because sometimes the environments you find yourself in were not designed for you to be in them. But that can change over time just by you being there and contributing. The lesson? People connect with authenticity. So find your own style for building relationships and contributing. Don't try to be someone you're not. Sometimes, like Olivia and Dorena and others, being different becomes your greatest asset. Finally, number 7, your skills will transfer in unexpected ways. Keep your eye on the long game. Terence and his internal audit work told him skills that he never imagined, which we've already talked about. Jen Olwing's year of volunteering with homeless teenagers on the streets of Chicago taught her empathy and conflict resolution. She said these kids have gone through extreme violence, situations where they had not been loved. How you deal with that friction was a big learning lesson for her. And so when she entered the corporate world, those skills gave her perspective. I remember her saying that when she bumped into friction in the corporate world, it seemed very minor compared to what she saw on the streets of Chicago with homeless teenagers. It puts things in perspectives and gives you the skills that you can apply. She also learned curiosity doing that. I realized how little I knew more and more every time I took on a new role. I also wanted to be curious and learn as much as I could when I had these opportunities. It's a good reflection. Pete also talked about his experience in China, and we've touched on this already about it being terrible at the time, but the skills that he learned from that transferring so well later on in his career. So I think the lesson here is don't dismiss any experience as wasted time. Every job, every failed experiment, every hard assignment, every detour, it gives you skills that will serve you. It's important to focus on building those skills and having those experiences and doing that work well and trusting, as we talked about before, trusting the process that those skills will transfer later on. So a final word, I think the early careers and then the ongoing careers of the 7 people that we've spoken to in these 7 episodes, they span decades, industries, continents, really show, yes, there are common themes when it comes to career advice. There are common themes with how we can and maybe should approach our work early on in our career. But it also shows that people who go on to have really successful and interesting and fulfilling careers didn't really know what to expect. They didn't really know how that path would unfold. This is a feeling that a lot of young people have when you come into your careers. You have lots of hopes for your careers, but it's also really natural to have some fears as well. And as many of them put it, I think, in these 7 episodes, there is no single right path. But if you build genuine relationships, get good at the boring stuff, be respectfully bold when you spot a moment to do so, particularly early on in your career, embrace the unpredictable or the crooked line career, set boundaries before you burn out, do your best to bring yourself to work, not always easy, but do your best. And trust that your skills will transfer. The things that you're learning, the experiences that you're having, the relationships that you're building will transfer well later on in life. Then I think you're giving yourself an edge. I think you're setting yourself up really well. Now, this isn't my opinion. These are conclusions that we've drawn just looking at the first 7 episodes of this podcast. So a couple of questions which might help. I guess, which of those 7 lessons resonates most with you right now? Be you early on in your career or a little further on? Which of those 7 lessons kind of stops you and thinks, yeah, I should revisit that, or I should start doing that? Another question to think about would be, which fleeting window is open for you right now? Maybe it's something you heard last week. Maybe it's something you saw yesterday. Maybe something you know is coming up. Which window is open for you today that might not be there next year or in 3 to 5 years? Is there a door that maybe you should just push open and walk through? As Josh Tyler put it, there are very few decisions that you make early on in your career that you can't reverse. And he's absolutely right. Which window is open for you right now that maybe you should go and climb through or walk through? And which one of those will you act on first?